Welcome to One and All. I'm Dan Atrell, and today we're joined again by my good friend, Hermetic astrologer Michael Ofek. Michael has spent decades working in and among the astrological community, and he's distinguished himself in his work bridging between traditional historical astromagical practices and contemporary applications. He offers a unique perspective on the intersections of shamanism, theurgy, and astrology, which will be our topic of discussion today. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you here again to delve deeper into these topics.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure being here again.
Well, let's jump right into the questions and have ourselves a nice little chat about these subjects. So, one of the prominent facets of your personal practice is what you call skywalking. Could you explain this concept?
Well, the term Skywalker comes from the description of Abaris, the shaman that is documented by Herodotus as the shaman coming from Hyperborea, from the northern lands, which were considered somewhat of paradise in sort of mythological terms for the Greeks. And Abaris, the Hyperborean, is said to be a skywalker. And this is a theme that you see a lot in Mongolian, Siberian, and other shamanic cultures of sky dwellers, skywalkers, shamans that, in a sense, have connection with the sky and are sort of a bridge between the sky and the earth. So, in a sense, they can connect to the heavenly powers and bring them down to earth, in a sense. And it is my view that this sort of general shamanic archetype was somewhat prevalent in many, many prehistoric cultures that had a fascination and connection with the sky, with the luminaries. And I think this is pretty obvious for any anthropological accounts of early times that maybe almost all over the globe, you see this, how do you say, like the ritualization or...
like a sacralization.
Yes, of planets, of certain constellations, you see that in, Central America and North America, and of course you see that, in the Middle East, you see that in Egyptian culture, you see the need to mimic the sky, the need to mirror the heavens in, for instance, archaeological structures and other religious temples and stuff. So that theme of connecting the heavens and the earth. And in heavens, we're not only speaking about the physical heaven, of course. We're speaking about people that emphasize the connection with the spirit world. So you see this theme all around in very ancient cultures. And so for me, skywalking is sort of the more shamanic perspective to what we call astrological magic or planetary magic, in the sense of a person that can surf the waves of time, surf the waves of planetary rhythmic natural cycles. So in a sense, skywalking in general, for me at least, is a spiritual path. It is a constant refinement and perfection of the astral powers in the soul. And this sort of connects to the sentiment of the perfecting the soul on earth. And then you can even tie in the notion that the planets are faculties of the soul, in a sense, or at least principles that are connected to faculties of the individual soul. And by perfecting these faculties, by aligning with them, with their cycles, with their rhythmic movements and effluences, then you are aligning your soul with this cosmic music and finding that special harmony, natural flow. And of course, the more this is done with conscious intention and an understanding of this cosmic flows, then the more powerful it is, in the sense, that you're not only becoming an active part of the cosmic motion and participating in it, you're also directing it and compelling it to certain ends. So in a sense, this is skywalking for me. And I think we touched upon some of this in our earlier talk about the argument that a lot of the magical tradition, and specifically the astrological magic tradition, in my view, is based on these shamanic figures and shamanic approaches, based on more naturalistic, paganistic sort of connection with nature and natural cycles. And this is a very, very important aspect of it, the direct and immediate experience. So in distinction of a magician, for instance, that is sort of doing things technically the right way, the shaman is connecting to different states of consciousness that not only align with the power at hand, but communes with it, sees visions, allies with it. So these are part of the distinctions that are tied into that term.
So it is almost a kind of quasi-mystical path in addition to being a magical path. I think often people make a distinction between magic and mysticism, magic being more practical in its ends. And there is an extent to which shamanism has practical goals. People will seek out shamans as medicine men to heal parts of their body, even to go into their bodies at times. Or they might be sought out to find lost objects and that sort of thing. So there is a practical component, but there is also a kind of mystical component that is more focused on raising consciousness, raising awareness. And in this way, we're getting more in line with what we might call something like Neoplatonic philosophy of trying to meld the noetic light that is within us with that great noetic light from which we all emanated from ultimately. It's a kind of ascent of the soul, not just a kind of seeking of material gains. But could you touch on how those elements kind of interact with one another?
Yes. Well, first of all, a lot of the astrological magic material, and I think magic in general, and theurgy specifically, are based upon the Platonic framework, in a sense, and Pythagorean framework maybe, but this cosmology, the Platonic cosmology and the Neoplatonic cosmology, is a very important central key to understanding a lot of the distinctions made in sort of the ideas that influence and inspire this magical tradition. But, again, going back, and there's also even accounts of, for instance, Orphic mystery tradition influencing Pythagoras, influencing Plato. So they didn't spring out of nowhere. They had more rationalized systems with more, mathematically and geometrically oriented and rationally oriented, and somewhat less of that direct engagement. But it's still there. You can see it between the lines. So the distinction of, for instance, the Neoplatonic scheme of hypostasis or emanation is very important to our craft. But I think the missing element, and this is why I push the shamanic aspect or the skywalking aspect, the missing element is the ecstatic, in a sense, is the direct experiential aspect. because as magic had become more rationalized and more technical, it seems that this is less emphasized. It's not that it isn't, but this is something that for me was always very, very fundamental, because rationalizing and can take you so far. But we are speaking about living powers, living entities, living intellects, in a sense, moving, shaping, guiding the cycles of nature, the cycles of reality. This is really what astrology is talking about. So being a Skywalker is, in a sense, it's emphasizing the direct contact with these powers, and it's a continuous engagement and intentional active participation with this bridging of earth and sky, and spirit and matter. And this, again, this is a distinctive, or in distinction to the sort of event oriented magic, or desire based magic, that I'm doing just this technical thing, writing these sigils, saying those words, burning this incense, and aligning it astrologically. And that's all. I'm done. I made a talisman, and now let's see what's going on. And I think really that's in the heart of astrological magic, anyway, which is more theurgic anyway. You can see that in sort of surviving Sabian texts, and that it is really a continuous spiritual path of self-perfecting. And it's also utilizing ecstatic states of consciousness to commune with celestial and terrestrial spirits, and journey into planetary realms, and becoming a conduit of this life, light, energy that the luminaries and stars symbolize, and also somewhat literally emanate. So the shaman sort of channels it through himself, and this is a very important distinction, and something that I feel that is needs to put more emphasis on. First of all, there is a lot of association or likeness between shamanic motives to theurgic motives, in a sense. Even though, for instance, the Iamblican theurgy is very philosophically sophisticated, the rites themselves are, in a sense, above the intellectual aspect of it. It's the intellect can get you so far, but there's an emphasis on direct experience, and this is something that you hear Iamblica speak about. That philosophers are speaking about the gods, but theurgists really do the gods' work, which is what theurgy is. So they are, in a sense, embodying the gods, or ascending to their godly aspect, and even bypassing some of the more daimonic, down here aspects of the creative powers. And that's sort of one of their aims. And one of the things that distinguishes shamans from maybe other practitioners is the shaman has an immediate experience with gods and spirits. He sees them, in a sense, face to face. He implores them, he aligns with them, and gets visions, and gets like oracular communication, in a sense, like the Oracle of Delphi. She needed to enter a trance-like state. There's many theories on what she did in order to enter this. If that was gases, coming out of the earth in Delphi, or it was something some entheogen that she drank, or whatever. But she needed to be in ecstatic mode in order to act as a medium for communicating with these gods and spirits. So this is a major element of the work, in my mind. Probably the origin of the archetype of the magician is the shaman, is the person that has these abilities and can journey into these worlds. And, I can go on and on about all the similarities and the motives that you can see in ancient cultures and Greek culture, which are aligned with a lot of very, very ancient shamanic motives. For instance, the animistic perspective, which is, of course, very much part of, pagan and shamanic ancient cultures. But, also the Platonic approach is animistic. The cosmos is a living being. Everything is alive in a sense, and populated by spirits. And most of the Neoplatonics would speak in these terms. And of course, Hermetic texts would speak in these terms. It's all full of spirits and populated by creative powers. Cosmologies have a lot of similarities. The tripartite cosmology or the three worlds cosmology, you can see all around the globe almost in very ancient shamanic cultures. And of course, cultures that we theorize, at least, I wouldn't say we know, but we theorize that have a lot of influence on the religions and the mystery traditions, in Greek culture. So again, I think this is something that needs to be revived somewhat in order to practice this form of astrological magic, which I call skywalking.
Right. It reminds me a lot of the Asclepius, the Hermetic Asclepius, which a big part of the idea in the Asclepius is that the religion of Egypt is fading away, and Hermes is lamenting this loss of this mode of religiosity, which is recognizing the divine in the noetic world and bringing that divinity down into the material world and filling this world with gods, and in that way creating a kind of divine feedback loop where the gods make man and man makes the gods, and there's a kind of recognition of mutual divinity. And that is the true religion of Egypt that is being lost and lamented by Hermes. So in a way, the skywalking is an attempt to restore that kind of tradition, but almost with a veneer of more archaic, even more ancient religiosity than even the ancient Egyptians.
Yes. And I think, another element which is important here is, again, the reconnecting to nature, to natural cycles, which is a very intimate part of the experiential practice itself. Because even though the cycles of the planets are sort of an image of eternal noetic ideas or forms or sort of monadic creative agents, they are embodied in the cycles of nature, and they are, in a sense, this is through the body, this is the way to sort of harmonize with these higher powers through the medium of corporeal reality. And you can see that also as something very basic and vital in the old traditions of, for instance, the Eleusinian mysteries, for instance, that they were really working, based on the story of Demeter and Persephone and the cycle of nature, and we're doing the lesser mysteries around the equinox. Yeah, I think the lesser mysteries are the spring equinox, and the greater mysteries are the autumn equinox around September. So it was all aligned with natural cycles, which is very intuitive because these are clocks that govern all the bodily cycles, for instance, the hormonal cycles, the day and night cycles, the cycles of the seasons. And of course, for ancient cultures who were also conditioned to agriculture and, so they were relying on these cycles for their survival. Even for having light at night, they would need the moon. Of course, they had fire too, But you understand what I mean. These natural cycles played a very intimate role in ancient cultures.
I'm reminded how at the height of the Eleusinian mysteries, I mean, we don't know for sure. What we know survives from the polemical attacks of the church fathers, but they would say that at the height of the Eleusinian mysteries, the Hierophant would raise an ear of barley or of corn or some kind of cereal, and that ear would be reaped with a scythe. And that was the height of the experience, in the same way that a Catholic priest raises the host above his head at the height of the consecration of the Mass. There was a similar sort of thing with this ear of grain being reaped in silence. So right at the very center of the mysteries is this acknowledgement that we are food, that we are the calories that we eat, and that there is no fundamental separation between the agricultural cycle and the human life cycle. These are intimately intertwined. And in the same way that the agricultural cycle goes through cycles of life and death, the human soul as well undergoes these kind of patterns of metempsychosis or reincarnation, where, like the crops rise and die again, the human soul will do much the same.
Right. And this is the theme of death and resurrection. And most of the shamanic initiatory aspects of the rituals had to do with some kind of death and resurrection, or a dismemberment. And of course, this also ties up a lot with Orphic themes and Dionysus and Osiris and other gods that were dismembered and then sort of recompiled and resurrected. And, this is something that I also see as a kind of theme in the way that astrological magic is practiced, because in a sense, every planetary power has its, in a sense, a pure form in the noetic realm, but when it incarnates into Earth, it has that sparagmos, it has that dismemberment, and then it has, in a sense, like sparkles of it in different aspects of the natural kingdom. So in certain animals, certain stones, certain herbs carry that virtue of that planet. And when the magician compiles you can say the Santo Mate, or the sort of the symbolic vessels carrying that virtue in the different kingdoms of nature, then he compiles sort of complete receptacle as much as possible. Like Isis compiling the different body parts of Osiris.
So I think Zagreus being torn apart by the Titans and then reconstituted.
Right. And Orpheus was also torn apart, and many gods were torn apart. It sort of aligns with sort of the metaphysical theme of the one and the many, in a sense.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Julian the Apostate, who wrote two famous orations, the oration to the sun, but also the oration to the mother of the gods, where he discusses Attis's castration. And he describes it as a cutting off of infinity. So what Attis is doing is he is cutting off generation, which is a symbol of multiplicity and of multiplying. And when he cuts off that member, he is symbolically making a return back to the unity, back to the one, and cutting away that infinitude of multiplicity. So it is definitely something that is clear in all of the myths, and so it's interesting to.
Yes, and we have more basic in Greek mythology. We have Kronos castrating Uranus. So in a sense, and Kronos, because he's Saturn, and he's sort of the outer rim of the classical planets, from the Hermetic ascension of the soul perspective, he sort of has to do with the separation and somewhat having to do with the lie of separation.
Yeah, cutting himself off from infinity.
Yes.
Uranos is heaven. Heaven is this kind of boundless expanse. But we as incarnated beings live in this kind of material world, which is bounded. So when Saturn cuts apart heaven and earth through the castration of Uranos, he is creating this kind of limited, bounded world out from the boundless.
Yes, exactly. And then he's separating things in a sense, and he's sort of the lie of separation, of loneliness in a sense. That's why he's also the planet that has to do with melancholy in the tradition, because he's the feeling of being castrated from the unity with the divine. So he's also a symbol of the corporeal and necessity and time and space and all the things that limit us from our eternal aspects in a sense.
Yeah, he's the source of contractive power in the Picatrix, whereas
Yes.
Jupiter is the expansion, the expansive power. Saturn constricts and confines.
Yeah, and because of the Saturn is one sphere above Jupiter, in a sense, he limits what Jupiter can expand. So the expansion of Jupiter is sort of, at least in the philosophical aspects of that archetype, is giving you a taste of the boundless, because he's sort of the augmentative life force that goes above the limitations and has that, how do you say, that aspect of connecting to an unlimited prolific life force. But it is still conditioned to time and space, and he still gets his orders from Saturn. So he's sort of the expansion as much as possible in the limitation of necessity. So this is an important theme that you see also very much in a lot of, again, shamanic cultures around the world, the death and resurrection initiatory aspect. And in a sense, it's sort of that occult axiom of dying before you die, which I think, simply put, is reflected in the most basic of cycles, which is the cycle of the earth. It's a cycle of day and night. So the sun, rises in the morning, but then when it sets, it sort of goes to the underworld. And there, it fights all the dragons or the beasts or the snakes and go through its initiation. And then it goes through a rebirth, in a sense. So I think in a sense, the cycle of the earth or the cycle of the sun is the most fundamental myth or fundamental.
It's the archetype of the hero's journey, for sure.
Yes. Yes.
And so many famous heroes, like Samson or you name it, Heracles and the 12 labors, they are microcosms of this journey of the sun, whether it be through the cycle of the day or through the 12 signs of the zodiac, which
or the cycle of the seasons, which is sort of a corresponding cycle.
Yeah.
So you can see how all this sort of ties up to very, very early origins.
Because it is rooted in the basic facts of life. They are things that we all experience everywhere around the world. We may experience them in different ways and tell different stories about them, but fundamentally we're rooted together by these basic facts of life, that the earth circles around the sun, but of course to us it appears from this point of view that the sun is circling around the earth and so on. So this actually ties in quite nicely to the next question that I wanted to ask you, and that is that there's this idea that develops among Renaissance philosophers of a kind of hierarchy of hidden worlds. So you have the natural world and its spirits. These are things like elemental spirits, and these are at the bottom. And then you have a celestial world in the middle, which is populated by the planets and the planetary intelligences and the stars. And then we have a super celestial world, which has angels and divine names populating it. So does this super celestial world play into your practice?
Very much so. Very, very much so. Because, first of all, this trichotomic or tripartite cosmology is also mirrored in a lot of shamanic cosmologies. And of course, this is also sort of a basic trait of Neoplatonic thought. So you have depending on how you want to count it, because you can count the one as being one hypostasis, and then the noetic hypostasis is the world below it, and then the soul hypostasis is sort of the third world. But in a more practical sense, and this is also, you mentioned Julian the apostate, in the hymn to Helios, he also does this differentiation between the noetic realm, which is centered in the, you can say, the noetic aspect of the sun. So it has sort of that central sun-like emanation. And then you have the psychic sun, which has to do with the soul and with the celestial in the sense of the movement of planets and the movement of time. And then you have the physical sun, which of course is the sun that gives us warmth and light and crops and all the material aspect of solar power. So the three world cosmology of magic, which also a very big part of medieval and Renaissance magical doctrines, is, in my view, based on this trichotomic view of the world, which again is also mirrored in a lot of shamanic cosmologies. And it's fundamental because, well, I'll take a step back and I want to say something. I've been accused of being a Neoplatonist. And I am to a degree, but I don't feel that I identify with Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy so much as I understand that it was a fundamental cosmological basis for astrology, for magic, so I have to sort of put that as a central model to understand these arts that are derived from this cosmology. Even if it's not, straightforward or not written, you can see that in these ancient writings. And you can see different variations of this in Hermetic texts or the Chaldean oracles or etc. So I think this is fundamental as a model, not only for understanding, in somewhat of a simplistic sense, but us understanding the world, but also understanding the ancient world view that these arts are, basing their assumptions. So if you take this key in deciphering astrology and astrological magic, then it's a very, very useful model. It's a very useful model because you have sort of distinctions that may become very practical, and I would say are also very experiential. What I mean is, for instance, part of the way that I go about the experience that I call attunement or alignment is by charging a psychological somatic state. Every internal experience is a state in that sense. So you can sort of divide the different states based on the categories of the planets. So you might have a memory or an image of, for instance, a specific love to someone. But this specific love is but it's a derived variation of the archetype, of the general archetype of love, or you can say the noetic idea of love. In the same sense of the dismemberment and resurrection, so you start with a dismembered image, in a sense, which is sort of a specific aspect of, for instance, love. But this specific instance has to be tied to the general aspect that we all share, in a sense. That is sort of the archetypal idea of love that things can only participate in. So if you're experiencing the love of your child, for instance, you're participating in sort of the eternal present aspect of love in general. So part of the shamanic, theurgic mystagogy of this aspect is that you transcend the different variations and direct yourself to embody or align with the presence of this noetic form.
Right. So this reminds me of Diotima's ladder, of course.
Yeah.
Where Socrates tells, I believe it's in the Symposium of Plato, Socrates tells about how he learned from a certain wise woman, Diotima of Mantinea, that love is like a ladder and it ascends from the lower stages, which is the love of particular bodies, to the love of all bodies. So, as you call it, a more general kind of love. And then we ascend through the ranks towards the love of love itself. And then we start to get towards the soul's yearning for the one. And all individual loves are adumbrations of that kind of ultimate love of the soul for its return back to the one.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is, I think, the case of Diotima. She was probably, a priestess in the mystery schools. So you go up the ladder from the specific things that are more tied to the physical to the more soul-like aspects. For instance, the soul-like aspect of love, loving not the body, but the soul of the person. And then, loving the wisdom and loving human institutions and etc. Then you go up the ladder until you are united with the root or seed of the idea of love itself. And to that place, you don't carry your intellect. This is a direct experience. And interestingly, in the account of Diotima, when she's asked, what is Eros? There's a lot of Eros in the sense of love or erotic love. She also speaks about Eros as the archetypal daimon. And I think this is very, very interesting because the daimons are sort of bridging the sort of higher monadic creation principles or gods with the corporeal world of generation and corruption. So the eros or the love is sort of the archetypal bridge that helps the souls connect to these higher realms. Because from the metaphysics of love or the metaphysics of eros, from Plato to Plotinus, eros is also an expression of the urge of the soul to rise back to the one or rise back to its origin, and that's sort of paradoxical because eros is also the urge to embody the spiritual. It's the urge to give it vessels in corporeal reality, in a sense.
Yeah,
and it is
it's
also
a primordial force. Like in Hesiod, I believe that the original three things are chaos and Gaia, which you could say as are matter and void, and then Eros, the kind of attractive force between them that wants to be more than just those three principles.
Exactly. And this is so important because Eros is known, as this sort of Cupid character, later on in mythology. But for the Orphics, he was a primordial god and a primordial force of the universe that unite things, but also that is how do you say, a precondition for multiplication.
Yeah, complexification, I was thinking.
Yeah, because of the reproduction that it aims for. It's sort of that strive to reproduce. And from Diotima's perspective, the reproduction is the bringing of beauty into the world. It's sort of that eternal cyclic element of embodying the eternal beauty.
Yeah. And I think this is really important because this is where Hermeticism diverges from other so-called Gnostic traditions, in that it doesn't think that embodiment is dirty or evil or is somehow robbed of divinity in any kind of way. All of it is divine in a certain way.
I'm glad you mentioned this, because I wanted to mention this before, and it's a good place to say that. But this is, again, I think, part of the problem, because the more intellectually sophisticated philosophy and even the magical arts and have become, then the natural embodiment has turned into something that needs to be escaped or is evil. And part of what I feel that we need to account for or connect again is how nature is really our teacher, and how embodiment is, in a sense, the way to connect to the godly in the cycle of change. I think part of the pathology of Western culture is this division. It's looking at nature from the outside. It's not fully embodied. And this is a fundamental part why I think that in the most essential aspect of astrological magic or astrological knowledge is the recognition of this very basic biological cyclic aspect, and that it is so basic and it is so natural that it's almost we can't even see it, in a sense. We are influenced by changes of temperature of light during the day. Our hormones change in different phases of the cycle. We are influenced in almost every aspect, and if we do this division and try to divide the soul or the intellect from the natural cycles and the corporeal bodies, then
we experience a kind of abscission, or
then we don't experience we don't experience them fully. We don't commit to them. We don't work through them, in a sense. So in a sense, we have that sort of a very old fear of embodiment, and the flesh is full of desires, is full of pain, of course. And I think that if we don't close this cycle, if we don't go within, like the sun goes into the underworld, then we don't get out of the other side. We just continue coming back here, maybe. But this is a very prominent part of, I think, why are we, even going through this sort of physical experience. So we have to connect back to the sun, to the moon, to the cycles of the earth. And this realignment that puts us back in sync with these cycles, of course, has a profound influence on our psychological state, on our mental state, on our emotional state. These might not be so much different, but these are distinctions. So this is what I call sort of an astrological diet, in the sense of becoming healthy in harmonizing with nature. You can say that, specifically for the body, for instance, what constitutes health? it's sort of the harmonizing of the body with these big clocks, in a sense, doing things as nature intended it to do. When we stray for this, we have, pathologies, we have sickness. So the more direct and unmitigated, in a sense, the experience of nature, the healthier we are. So this is sort of the harmonization and alignment that this knowledge allows, instead of just instinctively doing things from your natural instincts and urges. This gives you a template for understanding things intellectually and participating intentionally in certain expressions of these cycles and these powers.
One of the stories that I'm reminded of is at the end of Homer's Odyssey. The suitors set up a game for Odysseus. In order for him to prove his worth, he has to fire an arrow through a bunch of axe heads that are lined up. And so you have these little apertures that are all aligned on these axes, and he's supposed to take an arrow and fire it right through these loops. And, if one of those loops is off by even a little bit, it would make that challenge so much greater. And so I think this is a good analogy for astrological magic, in the sense that you are aligning your axe heads in a way so that you can fire your arrow straight through and not hit one of the axes along the way and have your path kind of deflected or thrown off. And so it's almost Taoistic in a certain way, because you are trying to flow with the order of things and not force things too much, and to strive for balance in all things in order to make that clean shot through the axe heads.
Yes, and this alignment of your inner cycle, you can say, with the external cycles, is also the alignment of these three hypostases. It's the alignment of the physical with the soul and with the noetic aspect of the soul, in a sense. This is also a recipe for magic in general. Also in the non-intentional magical sense. You have an inspiration, you have an idea, you have an image in your mind, and then you're moved by sort of that. I would say that an erotic impulse, but you're moved by an emotion. You're moved to manifest that. You desire it, and then you act on the physical in order to instantiate it. So we all do that. We are moved by ideas and ideologies and beliefs, etc. Condition our soul, in a sense, to move in a certain direction and shape the material as far as possible to get to that place, or to make that object that first only existed in our mind as an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's sort of the very simple terms. This is the recipe for magic. If you do that intentionally, and you do that while also in alignment with the associated quality, while it is rising in the natural cycles, a bit like in agriculture, there's good times to sow and good times to reap, etc. Then you not only express your own will and your own creative powers, but your creative powers are aligning with higher creative powers. And then you get that succession, like your example with the axis.
Mm-hmm.
You get all the holes aligned, in a sense. And then that's the kairotic moment. And I would say that kairotic moments, or kairotic crossroads, which can be defined astrologically, are timeline changes. They change the timeline because these are places where the timeline is potentially branched. You can use this opportune moment, or you can just stay, leave things as they are. If you have the knowledge of that crossroad of opportunity and you sow a seed there and you act on it, then you change your projection. You change the eventuation of the timeline that you're participating in.
Yeah, this is what Iamblichus says on the mysteries. He says that the gods don't unbind fate. And it's this kind of idea of, the soul traveling along different potentialities. And
yes.
And when you strike when the iron is hot, then the gods, in a way, they don't undo fate, but they unlock new potentialities instead of the ones that you were destined to take.
I would even go so far as saying that the idea of perfect nature, or the idea of the guiding diamond, the perfected version of what you're aiming to, is the telos of, or the attractor of, the timeline that you want to get in sync with in order to manifest the ideal, as much as possible, your perfected self. So this is also a kind of shamanic motive which you see a lot. The journey of the shaman, for instance, in the Andes, shaman practice journeying into the future. They would journey to find the best version of themselves in the future in order to sort of align with that version of themselves. Because potentially, you can take a wrong turn here, a wrong turn there, not use any opportune moments, etc., and express a lower version of your potential, let's say. So part of what we can term free will, to a degree, that's a big subject, is the will to changing the forking path of different timelines that are still coherent with your birth chart, with the cycles of the planets and things you cannot change. So you can say that every birth chart, for instance, has many versions of manifestation, and at each opportune moment, at each crossroad, you can use these opportunities to align to a more perfected aspect of yourself. So you can say that perfect nature, in a sense, is your future optimal realization that sort of guides you through time to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I think the definition in the Picatrix is something like perfect nature is the spirit of the sage working in union with the planet that, I forget the exact terminology, but that governs your chart.
The nativity. Yes.
Yes. And so finding out what your natural talents are, and this kind of coincides a little bit with thelema and finding your true will. It's not simply your wants, but it is, what are your talents? What are you good at? What has nature blessed you with? And then taking that and kicking that up to the nth degree so that you can actualize all of your potential and not squander your potential on an activity or a path, a vocation that you are not necessarily suited to.
Yes. And this is also, you can see that, for instance, in Aristotelian thinking about the teleological cause that is shaping your life.
In Aristotle, you have 4 causes. You have a material cause, you have a formal cause. So the material cause is like the stuff things are made of. The formal cause is like the blueprint in the carpenter's mind. And then you have a final cause, which is, let's say, if you're crafting a table, your final cause is fine dining.
Right.
There is an intention as to why you're making the table, and it is because you want to dine on that table. So
right.
that is the kind of telos of the table. So you have this marriage of form and matter to create the table. You have the wood and the shape of the table, but then it is being used for a certain intention. And that is
Right.
the final cause.
Right, right. The telos is what you are made for, in a sense.
Yeah, like the
Uh,
oak acorn turns into the oak tree. The oak tree is the telos of the acorn in Aristotelian philosophy.
yes. So, for instance, when you read Ptolemy, which was very influenced by Aristotle, of course, then he would say, for instance, he would say, in the hylomorphic perspective, at least in the physical world, matter comes first because you are a lump of matter. You're a baby. You're just that biological thing that is shaped in time by the powers of the soul to become something. So it's always striving to become, and sort of the attractor at the end of its becoming is that best version of its telos. So in a sense, the powers of the soul, are shaping the material aspect of our nature through time in order to reach a certain end, which can be something that we are supposed to for the collective, not only for our sake. So I think this is essential to the underlying spiritual path within these arcane traditions. You can see that in alchemy, you can see that in theurgy, you can see that in more spiritual aspects of magic and devotional aspects of astrological magic that you see in the Sabian traditions. I think this is the underlying element. And you can see that, for instance, in the philosophy of the virtues, that is also pretty eminent in Hermetic thought, that you need to perfect these different virtues that are associated with the planetary spheres. That's sort of the ascension process, is when you are not coerced by the negative aspect of, let's say, that planetary principle, and you align with its higher, more refined aspect. And then you can, when you ascend, you sort of give that away. How do you say? You like take off,
You shed them
you shed
like
them.
layers of skin. Yeah.
So I think that's a perspective which you can project for sort of the human experience in general, and also the incarnational experience, if you take it in a sort of a wider perspective, that each incarnation, we are incarnated into a certain time capsule, a certain chart, which emphasizes certain ideas that we need to experience in this life and learn to balance out and synchronize. So it's only logical to a degree that every life we will experience, for instance, Venus in different signs, Mars in different signs, Saturn in different signs, because we need to sort of experience this spectrum of manifestations in order to fully integrate the dismembered aspect of that planetary creative power or archetype, until we sort of regain the perfected, balanced, harmonized aspect of it into our souls in order to ascend. So you can take this model and sort of project it into many lives of working, with under different astrological configurations, in order to gain that, and not just as something that you do when you finish your sojourn here on Earth, and you know, so it's sort of a continuous process of putting these forces sort of under the control of the soul and not under the control of the body to a
Right.
certain degree.
And this is not, again, this is not a means of escaping the world so much as finding a place in this world. It is a matter of it sounds trivial to say it this way, but of providing value for people. I don't mean providing value in the business sense of the word providing value, but in the sense of being the highest instantiation of yourself that you can be, that is useful and conducive to life and health and happiness, and that these are the goals that humans are meant to strive for, to bring that into this world, because that stuff is out there: eternal happiness, eternal health, eternal life and light and wisdom and knowledge and all of these things. But it is like, how can we bring that stuff from the noetic world down into this world? Not necessarily so that we can escape here, but so that we can make this place a paradise. So when people say, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it's not this attempt to say, like, look, we're in this swimming pool full of crap and we're trying to find the ladder out of here. It's like, how can we fix the swimming pool? And the highest instantiation of the self is the person who can do that work of fixing that pool, such that the pool is nice and clean, clear water for everyone. And that is the highest potential that we strive for. That is the perfect nature, is like, how can we achieve a kind of utility for not just mankind, but all living things, and to try to turn this world into a paradise. I think that really is the message, at least of the Asclepius, as I understand it. It is fundamental to understanding the magical tradition, because what is magic ultimately is the doing of miracles or the performing of wonders. But what is wondrous to mankind is something that produces life, something that produces knowledge, something that produces intellect. These kinds of higher order principles is drawing those things down, bringing them into this world, and helping to make the world a better place. And, that sounds trivial, but so few people in this world actually do it. And if they did, we would live in a very, very different world. Okay, so we've been going for a little bit now, and I figured that what we should do is talk about a project that we have in the works coming up, and that is your core Astrological Magic Foundations course, which is starting on September 22nd. I participated in this last year, so you are working with some collaborators. And could you tell me how this course differs from other courses on astral magic? And I know that, we discussed this earlier. There aren't that many courses on astral magic, but what is different about yours?
Well, I would say there's a couple of elements that makes it unique. First of all, it's pretty extensive. It's 12 weeks. Each session is about 3 hours, and so there's the philosophy and the history, and a lot of my own reconstruction and hybridization with other shamanic motives and techniques and procedures to gain these states of consciousness and to live consciously under the astrological influences internally and externally, which is, I think, the essential aspect of that. But what makes this course, I think, unique is that it is also hands-on practical. It takes the students and trains them in all aspects of astrological magic creation and participation. There's a lot of exercises and there's a lot of practical guidance, and the final session is making a shared talisman together. So even learning about some metallurgy or some, jewelry making with David Weitzman, which is the artist that I've been working on with for almost 2 decades on making astrological jewelry creations and talismans. So he will be coming and he will also be giving, guidance and tools on how to physically make the talismans. And of course, I will be guiding the practical aspect of attunement and ritual and, how to connect to these powers and how to create through them and with them in your daily life and in talismanic rituals. So I think that's, as far as I know, there's no course that takes you through this live. And of course, there's the collaboration with you that contributes so much to the course. You're the perfect Gemini for this position. You're so full of knowledge, and you are sort of the representative of the academy. But of course, you're not the archetypal academic. You also delve into these worlds experientially, and of course, you did a lot of work with the translations and the Picatrix translations. So you're really an expert in sort of bridging the academical world and the practice world. So it's great having you on board. So yeah, I can go on and on, but these are things that make this, I think, journey very unique. It's timed astrologically. We're beginning at the 22nd of September, which is, of course, the autumn equinox, which is also the time of the greater mysteries. And much of the course would be experiential. And that's very important for me because I am also very cerebral and I can talk, intellectually about philosophy and metaphysics and astrology, forever. But without grounding this theory in direct experience, then you defeat the purpose of it.
Right.
So this is what I'm trying to do.
Your feet are planted on the ground and your head is in the clouds, but it's important to have both.
Yeah. So the intellect leads you there, but your own experience opens the door to really embodying this experience and feeling it and connecting with it.
So if people are interested in signing up for this, where should they go?
They should go to my website, hermetic-astrology.com, and they can sign up there. There's also an installment plan that I added for those that are somewhat challenged financially. So I hope people will join us to this journey. They can get into the website and read more about the course itself. And of course, they can contact me. And I just want to mention another expert that is part of the course, which is J.D. Kelly. And he's the person that is in charge of the Astral Magic conference, which is due in 2 weeks, too. From the 13 to the 15, I think, or the 16, all this weekend is an Astral Magic conference. I will be talking there too. And I'm going to do the opening keynote of the conference. And my talk is about time and the dimensions of time in astrological magic. So you're invited for this too, all of you that are interested in these subjects. So J.D. Kelly is part of the course. He's a vital part of the course, and he's helping me and helping the students and sort of managing the whole logistics. And so he's sort of the godfather of the course in a sense.
And, I spoke at the Astral Magic conference a few years ago, and I had a very positive experience with it. I'm not in it this year because I'm teaching my own course, so I've got to focus my attentions towards that, teaching about the Middle Ages rather than astrology. But I'm sure it will be a great time, and I recommend that people who are interested in Astral Magic, they definitely should sign up for both the Astral Magic conference and for the course on astrological magic with yourself. And so, Michael, thank you very much for coming back on the show, and it's always a pleasure to have you. And I wish you well in all of your future endeavors, and I look forward to working together again for the course.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your contribution and collaboration over the years. I appreciate you and your work so very much. Thank you.